Hi guys, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another Books Beside My Bed video. For those of you who are new here, I film one of these every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. And for those who are very familiar with the series, welcome back. This is my reading wrap up from the 23rd until the 29th of February, and it was my February edition of the Read Digital Challenge, which is a monthly challenge I'll be hosting every month this year, with the challenge to read as many of my ebooks as I possibly can in order to start clearing that TBR. I have something like over 300 unread ebooks on my Kindle, which I collect from various places, including BookBub's Daily Deals, Kindle Unlimited, things that I just purchase and have never gotten around to reading. So I need to get a move on with how I read these things. But I do collect them from various places. This challenge, if you have not seen my announcement and TBR videos for it, was a bingo board challenge. There were 9 squares. I did manage to read 9 books to complete all of the challenges because why not? But my TBR did not stay the same throughout the week. And this is the really good thing because I do go, as I am reading books on my Kindle, I do go through and just clear things off my Kindle that I'm no longer interested in reading. So as I said, I read 9 books. One of those was a young adult book. The rest were all adult books. There were about 5 NetGalley arcs on there that I had to read as well. So that was just a really good excuse to start clearing those off because I tell myself all the time that I will never get to like more than 3 NetGalley arcs and then I end up with 10. So I had to clear some of those out. I read a total of 3,028 pages and my yearly reading total is up to 63 books. Obviously with 9 books to talk about, I'm probably going to be pretty brief with most of these, and the NetGalley arcs will end up with reviews on my blog anyway. So if you're looking for more in-depth reviews of those books, just hang on a little bit and I will get those out very, very soon. The first book that I read this week was Headliners by Lucy Parker. This is book 5 in the London Celebrities series. It is a 2020 release from Carina Press and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is one of the NetGalley arcs that I had. And this follows Nick and Sabrina, who are 2 nighttime news hosts on one of the television channels in London. And they have this enemies feud going on until both of them sort of end up with a warning from their network, and the 2 are placed together on a morning talk show in the hopes of boosting the ratings of that morning talk show, which does quite poorly compared to others, and also as their last chance with the network to lift their image and lift their game. And obviously neither of them are very happy about it. They have to work through a lot of things, including mysterious incidents that begin to occur on set that look like sabotage. This was really fun. I was not entirely sure what to expect going into it. I'd heard some things about it, which is why I requested it from NetGalley, but I hadn't read anything by Lucy Parker, so this was really quite a nice way to test out her writing because I did really enjoy Nick and Sabrina as characters. Plus it was an enemies to lovers trope, which I really, really love in my romance books. I read this for the Read Digital Challenge to read a romance. Then I read The Night Tiger by Yang Zichu, which was a 2019 release from Quercus. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I have read one other book by this author. I really enjoyed The Ghost Bride, and I just liked the way that the story was written and sort of the historical magical realism elements that were woven through it, and The Night Tiger is no different. This is set in 1930s Malaya and it follows 2 characters, Ren and Jilin. Ren is, I think he's 11 in the book, and he is the houseboy of a doctor who passes away, and before he passes away the doctor tasks Ren with finding his severed finger which has gone missing, and Ren needs to reclaim this finger before the 49 days of mourning period is up, or his former master will be doomed to haunt the earth forever. And then the second story we have is Jilin, who is a young woman. She's apprenticed to a dressmaker, but in order to pay off her mother's gambling debts, she also works as a dance hall girl. And eventually the 2 paths cross. And then the Night Tiger, which is the title element of the book, comes from these mysterious deaths that begin occurring and the legends of tigers who can turn into men. The whole thing is just beautifully written and it's very, very hard to describe. You sort of have to read it and get immersed in the story because it is very historical, but it is so beautifully written. Once you know a few of the characters, you can really fall into the story very easily. Then I read 19 by Mackenzie Campbell. This is a 2020 release from Central Avenue Publishing. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. It is a young adult poetry collection. It was written by Mackenzie Campbell when she was 19, so I'm not entirely sure how old she is now, but it is a collection of her works from when she was 19. I read it for the Read Digital category to choose your own category, which was poetry, and unfortunately this one didn't really do it for me. I'm all for modern poetry, I have no issue with it. In fact, I find it a lot easier to read than classical poetry, but this one just It didn't connect with me emotionally, so it's a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I'm sure there are people out there who it will resonate with. It just wasn't me. Then I read The Beast of Beswick by Emily Howard. This is a 2020 release for Entangled. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is the first book in the Everly Sisters series. I read it for my Read Digital challenge to read a book with pink or red on the cover. This cover is obviously very red. It is a Beauty and the Beast historical romance retelling, and it was just fabulous and fun. We follow Astrid, who is a young woman who has been disgraced in her community because of the words of a very well-respected gentleman who she turned down his offer of marriage. This of course has lasting effects for the rest of her family, including her younger sister, who Astrid is very fiercely protective of. The two girls are the wards of her aunt and uncle until Astrid turns 21 very soon. And in order to save her sister from a potentially disastrous marriage proposal, she goes to Thane, who I think, I've forgotten who he is the Duke, where he is the Duke of. But she goes to Thane, or Nathaniel, and proposes marriage to him as just a marriage of convenience that will benefit them both. Thane is put off, but, well, he's not really put off, but he's sort of taken aback by her forwardness. And then eventually they come to an arrangement and they have this fake wedding, fake romance that turns into something very real. And I have to say, the wonderful thing about this story is all the side characters. Thane's servants are just delightful in the way that they scheme behind everyone's backs. I loved Astrid's sister and Thane's aunt, and the whole thing was just delightfully fun and entertaining. And yes, I'm definitely falling down the rabbit hole of historical romance books. It's happening, guys. The next book that I read was one of the books that I switched out from my original TBR, so I ended up reading Beat by Amity Cross, which was a 2014 Kindle release. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I read this for the challenge to read a book that I've had for 12 months or more, and I've had this sitting on my Kindle for who knows how long. This is a Australian MMA romance book, so it's sort of like one of the sports books, except it's about fighting. Our two main characters are Ren and Ash. Ren is a young woman who has spent most of her life looking after her very sick mother who had cancer after her father left them both. At the beginning of the book, Ren's mother has passed away and has tasked Ren with finding her father and connecting with her father, despite the fact that they've had no contact whatsoever. Ren finds him and he runs an MMA training gym, and after a confrontation with her father, he offers her a living space in the back of the gym because she has nowhere else to go. She's basically had to sell everything off after her mother's death. And so she begins to live in a little room out the back of the gym, and she gets to take classes in the gym as well. And she finds that she quite likes learning how to fight. While she's there training, she meets Ash, who is a former pupil of her father's, who has a bit of a rocky past with competing in MMA fights. And the two start off quite antagonistic to one another until events force them closer together, and then they begin a romance. This one is quite dark, but it was also one of the books where it took me about 2 pages to realise, because I didn't know this when I started reading it, that the book was written by an Australian. Because one thing about Australians, casual swearing is very, very cultural here. Not with everyone, but just in general. So there was a lot of swearing in the first couple of pages, and I'm like, gee, this sounds like it's Australian. And then about a chapter in, I got the confirmation that it was set in Melbourne, which was fun because I love anything that's set in Melbourne. Also kind of weird because I wasn't expecting it. Then I read Byrnes Owned by Annabeth Albert. This was another NetGalley arc. This is a 2020 release from Carina Press. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I read it for the challenge to read an LGBTQIA+ book. This is the first book in Annabeth's new Hot Shots series, and I've read through 2 of her other series plus a couple of standalones by Annabeth Albert. I really like her writing. I like the way she develops relationships. And this one follows Link and Jacob. It is a slow burn romance between firefighters. It is also an age gap romance. There's about 10 years between Link and Jacob, I think, from memory, which is not a huge age gap really these days, but it was enough that it's part of the storyline. Also, Link was Jacob's older brother's best friend, and the two best friends had a tumultuous sort of relationship, just like Jacob did with his older brother. And we find out at the beginning of the book that Jacob's older brother has passed away. Link, as the best friend who worked with him as a smoke jumper, has a lot of guilt around the death and thinks that he could have prevented it, so he's got that lingering complex going on. Meanwhile, Jacob is desperately trying to find his own place with the smoke jumpers and not sort of follow on from in his brother's footsteps, and to sort of be his own person within this career, which everyone else in his family can't stand because they lost one son to the job and they don't want to lose another one. So it's all very complex, and Link and Jacob have to work out whether they can have a relationship, whether it's worth it, whether it's just this thing that's been hanging over their heads for the last however many years, and whether they can sort of get past the ghost of Jacob's brother. I really enjoyed it. It's probably not my favourite of Annabeth Albert's series so far, but also I'm coming from a place where I didn't know smoke jumpers were a thing, so I had to learn about that as I was going through it, which was great. I just liked the way that this was not a quick fix romance story. They had to work at it pretty hard. Then I read The Switch by Beth O'Leary, which is the 2020 release from Quercus. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was also a NetGalley arc that I have had for a little while that I needed to get to. I read it for the Read Digital Challenge to read a recommended book. There's a few people who have talked about it, plus Beth O'Leary in general because of the flat share last year or the year before. I also read it for the Romanceopoly Square Flirts Corner, which was to read a book with a romance with characters who are over 40 years old, because this story is told in dual perspective and one of the main characters is, I think she's 80. Or just a little bit shy of 80. So we follow two main characters, Eileen, who is an 80-something-year-old woman who lives in a small country town in the UK, and her granddaughter, Lena, who is, I think, in her late 20s. She has a very successful career, but she finds herself getting stressed out, and she inadvertently bombs on a presentation, and her boss tells her to take time off, get herself together, de-stress, and then come back at the end of 2 months' time, and then they will continue, and then she can continue to work on her career. Lena's quite used to being in control, and obviously going on holiday, being forced onto holiday disrupts all of her plans, and eventually she and her grandmother decide that they'll actually swap lives for a while. So Eileen will come and live in Lena's UK apartment with her flatmates, and Lena will go and live in the country and just de-stress and potentially heal a relationship with her own mother who lives there. And the whole family is sort of reeling from the death 12 months earlier of Lena's sister who passed away due to cancer, and it's fractured a lot of the bonds between different family members. Meanwhile, Eileen has left her husband a few years earlier and decides she wants to try dating and find company and companionship, and so she can't find that in the small town, so she decides to try her hand in the big city, and it's just delightful and adorable because she is a no-nonsense go-getter. The whole thing was just fun. It's not strictly a romance, but there were romance elements in the story. It's definitely women's fiction. Then I read Mastered by Her Mates by Grace Goodwin. This is a 2016 release from KSA Publishing. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. It is like book 5 or 6 in the Interstellar Brides series. This was another book that I swapped out because I was supposed to read The False Prince by Jennifer Nielsen, but I really didn't want to. I read it for the challenge to read a book that you've been putting off. This is a book about space aliens and brides and subterfuge and spies, and honestly it was just ridiculous, but it was an entertaining read for about an hour and a half on the couch. I wish I could be more specific, but it's not a book that invites a lot of plot. It was pretty much about smutty scenes and alien technology and fated mates. So there's really not that much to talk about. And finally, I read Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey, which is the second book in the Hot and Hammered series. It is a 2020 release from Avon. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I probably didn't enjoy it as much as Fix Her Up because it's not as laugh out loud funny, although I did love seeing the same characters from Fix Her Up in the story because they did bring a lot of levity to some of the scenes, because this is a second chance romance about a marriage in trouble. I read it for the Read Digital Challenge to read a book with love in the title. I'm glad I finally picked this up because it is a new release and I sort of have been putting it off a little bit because I've heard mixed things, but I did really enjoy it. We follow Rosie and Dominic, who have been married for a number of years. They started dating in high school. They got married out of high school, and then Dominic joined the Marines and went off on tour, and then when he's come back, the marriage is a little bit different. And Rosie has always dreamed of being a chef, but that's never really come through. And she's selling perfume in a department store and she really, really hates that. And at the beginning of the book, she gets home one night, realizes that their marriage isn't the same and that she started to fall out of love with her husband, and so she walks out. Dominic does not want to let her go and is quite desperate to save their marriage. So he agrees to go to marriage counseling. Rosie finds the strangest couples counselor ever, and it's kind of hilarious and great. And the two begin to learn, you know, what are the actual problems in their relationship and how can they begin to address it? Are they falling out of love with one another, or do they actually still care deeply about each other? And there are definitely things in the book that I didn't like. Dominic's quite possessive, but he's also, once he begins to see why Rosie feels the way she feels, he understands his part in it. He just doesn't know how to change. So I think that part made me feel less uncomfortable with that side of his personality, but it is an element in there that if you don't like that sort of thing, it could bother you. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. I'm quite liking reading Tessa Bailey's books. I'll have to read a few more. But yes, that was my Read Digital reading week, and I'm going to start getting things ready for March's challenge, so stay tuned. I'll have the prompts and my TBR coming out for that in the first couple of weeks in March. If you participated in the readathon, let me know down below. What did you read for Read Digital? I'm really interested in knowing what sort of things people pick up and have on their Kindle, because for me it's mostly romance books or things that I can't find in print. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're having a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye guys.